Real estate agent murdered in 1977. Open house horror. Chapter 1. The showing September 23, 1977, started like any other Friday for Diane Morgan. She woke at 6:30 in the morning in her two-story colonial home in the Meyerland neighborhood of Houston, made breakfast for her children, 8-year-old Sarah and 6-year-old Michael, and got them ready for school. Her husband Robert had already left for his engineering job at Shell Oil Company, kissing her goodbye in the pre-dawn darkness as he did every weekday. Diane dropped the kids at Meyerland Elementary at 7:45, then drove to the Heritage Realty office on Westheimer Road, arriving just before 8:30. At 34, Diane had been selling real estate for 6 years and had built a solid reputation as a knowledgeable, trustworthy agent who specialized in family homes in Houston's western suburbs. "Morning, Diane," called Linda Peterson, her colleague and closest friend at the agency, as Diane settled into her desk. "You've got messages. Someone called 3 times yesterday afternoon trying to reach you." Diane picked up the pink message slips. All 3 were from someone named George Morrison, with a phone number and a note. "Very interested in Shadywood property. Can show today?" The Shadywood property, 4218 Shadywood Lane, was a listing Diane had picked up 2 weeks earlier. It was a modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house in the Memorial area, built in 1963. The owners had already relocated to Dallas for work and were eager to sell. At $78,000, it was priced reasonably for the neighborhood and should have attracted more interest than it had. Diane called the number on the message slip. A man answered on the second ring. "Mr. Morrison, this is Diane Morgan from Heritage Realty, returning your call about the Shadywood property." "Yes, thank you for calling back." The man's voice was smooth, educated, with a hint of what might have been a northeastern accent. "I'm relocating to Houston for work, and I'm very interested in seeing that house. Would today be possible? I know it's short notice, but I'm only in town until tomorrow morning. Let me check my schedule." Diane flipped through her appointments book, a leather-bound planner she used religiously to track every showing, meeting, and commitment. She had a closing at 10, lunch with a potential client at noon, and an open house scheduled for 3. "I could meet you at the property at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Would that work?" "Perfect. I'll see you there at 2. Can I get your contact information for my records? Current address, phone number where you can be reached?" There was a brief pause. "I'm staying at the Warwick Hotel temporarily. You can reach me there. Room 214. And you said you're relocating from where?" "Boston. I'll be working at the medical center. I'm a physician." They confirmed the details and hung up. Diane made a note in her appointments book. 2 p.m., 4218, Shadywood LN, George Morrison, Warwick Hotel, RM 2114, relocating from Boston, physician. The morning proceeded routinely. The closing went smoothly. A young couple buying their first home in Bel Air. Lunch with the potential client was promising. They wanted to see several properties over the weekend. By 1:30, Diane was back at the office, gathering her materials for the Shadywood showing. "Heading out?" Linda asked, looking up from her desk. 2 o'clock showing in Memorial. Should be back by 3 for the open house on Briar Grove. "Want me to cover the open house if you run late?" "I should be fine, but thanks." This guy sounded serious. Relocating doctor needs to buy quickly. Could be an easy commission. Diane drove west on Interstate 10 toward the Memorial area, exiting onto Memorial Drive and winding through the tree-lined streets until she reached Shadywood Lane. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac, a typical ranch-style home with cream-colored brick, a well-maintained lawn, and mature oak trees providing shade. Several of the neighboring houses showed signs of renovation. The Memorial area was becoming increasingly desirable as Houston expanded westward. Diane arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. She didn't see another car in the driveway or on the street that might belong to her client, so she let herself in with the lockbox key and began opening curtains and turning on lights to make the house more welcoming. The interior was dated but clean. Hardwood floors throughout the living areas, floral wallpaper in the kitchen, avocado green appliances that were fashionable a decade ago, but now looked tired. The master bedroom had burnt orange carpeting and wood-paneled walls. The second and third bedrooms were smaller, painted in pale yellow and blue, respectively. Diane was in the kitchen, making notes about potential selling points to mention to Mr. Morrison, when she heard the front door open. "Mr. Morrison," she called out. "Yes, sorry I'm a few minutes late." The man who appeared in the kitchen doorway was in his mid-30s, average height. wearing dark slacks and a light blue dress shirt. He had brown hair, neatly trimmed, and wore glasses with dark frames. His appearance was utterly unremarkable, the kind of face that would blend into any crowd. "No problem at all. I'm Diane Morgan. Welcome to 4218 Shadywood." She extended her hand, and he shook it briefly. His hand was cool, his grip firm, but not aggressive. "Nice property," he said, looking around the kitchen. "Good bones." "Absolutely. Built in '63, so it's solid construction. The decor is a bit dated, but that gives you the opportunity to customize to your taste. Let me show you around." Diane led him through the house, pointing out features, discussing the neighborhood, mentioning the excellent schools and proximity to the medical center where he'd said he would be working. The man asked appropriate questions about property taxes, homeowners association rules, the age of the roof and HVAC system. They moved through the living room, the dining area, the 2 smaller bedrooms. Finally, Diane led him to the master bedroom at the back of the house. "This is the master. It's a good size, with the attached bath and a decent closet. The carpet and paneling would probably be the first things to update," but she never finished the sentence. The man moved with sudden, practiced speed. One moment he was standing behind her, looking around the room. The next, his arm was around her throat, cutting off her air and her scream before it could form. Diane struggled, dropping her briefcase, clawing at the arm crushing her windpipe. But the man was strong and knew exactly what he was doing. He applied pressure to her carotid arteries with precise force, cutting off blood flow to her brain. Within seconds, Diane's vision began to tunnel. Within 15 seconds, she lost consciousness. He held the pressure for several more minutes, long after she'd gone limp in his arms, ensuring death. Then he carefully lowered her body to the burnt orange carpet, arranging her so she lay on her back, arms at her sides, as if she'd simply laid down to rest. The man took a moment to catch his breath, then methodically began covering his tracks. He retrieved Diane's briefcase from where she'd dropped it and removed her appointments book, slipping it into his jacket pocket. He walked through the entire house, checking every surface he might have touched, wiping everything down with a handkerchief. He paused in the master bedroom doorway, looking down at Diane's body one last time. There was no emotion on his face, no remorse, no satisfaction, nothing but cold calculation. Then he turned, walked out of the house, locked the front door behind him using the key Diane had left on the kitchen counter, and drove away in a nondescript sedan that none of the neighbors would later remember seeing. At 3:15, when Diane hadn't arrived at the Briar Grove open house and wasn't answering her car phone, Linda Peterson began to worry. It wasn't like Diane to be late or to miss an appointment without calling. By 3:45, Linda's worry had escalated to real concern. She called the Heritage Realty office. "Is Diane back yet?" "Haven't seen her," the receptionist replied. "Want me to try her car phone again?" "I've tried it 4 times. No answer." Linda made a decision. "I'm going to drive by the Shadywood property, make sure everything's okay." Linda arrived at 4218 Shadywood Lane at 4 o'clock. Diane's car, a 1975 Buick Century, distinctive with its light blue paint, was parked in the driveway. The house appeared quiet, all the curtains open, lights on inside. Linda knocked on the front door. No answer. She tried the handle and found it locked. Walking around the side of the house, she peered through windows, calling Diane's name. No response. No movement inside. A prickle of real fear ran down Linda's spine. She went to the nearest occupied house and knocked urgently. An elderly woman answered. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for my colleague. She was showing the house next door and she's not answering. Her car's there, but the house is locked. Do you have a phone I could use to call the police?" The woman's eyes widened. "Of course, dear. Come in." The Houston Police Department responded to the call at 4:17. 2 patrol officers arrived first, followed shortly by Linda's return to the property with a spare key from the Heritage Realty office. "Ma'am, please wait here," one of the officers instructed Linda, as they unlocked the front door and entered the house. It took them less than 2 minutes to find Diane's body in the master bedroom. By 5 o'clock, 4218 Shadywood Lane was swarming with police vehicles, an ambulance, and the Harris County Medical Examiner's van. Detective Frank Cassidy of the Houston Police Department's Homicide Division arrived at 5:20. Cassidy was a 20-year veteran of the force, a big man in his early 50s with iron-gray hair and a reputation for methodical, thorough investigations. He'd worked dozens of homicides and had seen just about every variation of human violence Houston had to offer. but this one struck him as different from the moment he walked into the master bedroom. Diane Morgan lay on her back on the orange carpet, her expression peaceful, almost serene. She was fully clothed, her outfit, a professional navy skirt suit and cream blouse, undisturbed. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no signs of struggle. The room around her was perfectly orderly. "What's the preliminary cause of death?" Cassidy asked Dr. Harold Nichols, the medical examiner who was kneeling beside the body. "Manual strangulation, most likely," Nichols replied. "See the petechiae in the eyes. That indicates asphyxiation. There's also faint bruising on the neck that's more visible under the jaw. The killer used a chokehold technique, compressed the carotid arteries. Victim would have lost consciousness in seconds, been dead in minutes. Very little opportunity to fight back. Sexual assault? No obvious signs, but we'll know more after the autopsy." Cassidy surveyed the room. "Where's her purse? Briefcase? Real estate agents carry materials, don't they?" A crime scene technician pointed to a leather briefcase lying near the bed. That was on the floor, about 3 feet from the body. "We've photographed it but haven't moved it yet." Cassidy pulled on gloves and carefully opened the briefcase. Inside, he found listing sheets for various properties, business cards, a calculator, pens, and a zippered pouch containing makeup and personal items. But no wallet, no appointments book. Her colleague said she always carried an appointments book, Cassidy noted. Leather-bound planner, wrote down every meeting. "It's not here." "Taken by the killer?" suggested his partner, Detective Eugene Martinez, who just entered the room. "Possibly, or possibly she left it in her car." But Cassidy doubted that. Real estate agents brought their planners to showings to schedule follow-up appointments with interested clients. Linda Peterson, who'd been waiting outside in a state of controlled panic, was brought in to answer questions. She was 31, blonde, visibly shaken by what had happened to her friend. "Tell me about Diane's appointment today," Cassidy asked gently. "Who was she meeting?" "A man named George Morrison. He'd called yesterday afternoon 3 times trying to reach her. Said he was very interested in this property. Diane called him back this morning and scheduled the showing for 2 o'clock. Did you speak with this Mr. Morrison?" "No. I just took the messages. Diane handled all the contact with him." "Did Diane seem worried or concerned about the appointment?" "Not at all. She thought it sounded promising. A relocating doctor. Serious buyer. She was looking forward to it. What can you tell me about normal procedures for property showings?" "Did Diane usually meet clients alone?" Linda nodded. "It's standard practice. We meet clients at properties all the time. Sometimes we know them from previous interactions. Sometimes they're new contacts. We're supposed to get identification and contact information, but..." She trailed off, wiping at tears. "We trust people. We have to do this job." Cassidy made extensive notes. "Did Diane mention anything unusual recently? Anyone making her uncomfortable? Any properties where something strange happened?" "No, nothing. Diane was experienced, professional. She'd been doing this for 6 years. She knew how to handle difficult clients, how to stay safe." Linda's voice broke. This shouldn't have happened. Who would do this to her? That was exactly what Cassidy intended to find out. The investigation kicked into high gear immediately. Diane's car was processed for evidence. Fingerprints, fibers, anything that might provide a lead. Her car phone records were pulled. The Shadywood property was thoroughly searched. Every surface dusted for prints. Every fiber collected and cataloged. Robert Morgan was notified of his wife's death at his office at 6:30 that evening. 2 uniformed officers delivered the news, and Robert collapsed in shock and grief. His co-workers had to help him to a chair, bring him water, call a friend to drive him home because he was in no condition to operate a vehicle. The autopsy was performed the following morning, Saturday, September 24th. Dr. Nichols confirmed manual strangulation as the cause of death. The killer had used a blood choke technique, compressing the carotid arteries on both sides of the neck simultaneously. Death had occurred between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday, consistent with the scheduled showing time. Critically, there was no evidence of sexual assault. Diane had not been robbed. Her wedding ring and watch were still on her body. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunistic violence. This was something else. This was planned, Cassidy told Martinez as they reviewed the evidence in the Homicide Division offices Sunday morning. The killer contacted her specifically, made an appointment, lured her to an empty house, and murdered her in a way that required skill and planning. Then he took her appointments book. Why? To cover his tracks, Martinez suggested. If the book had his contact information, his phone number, details about the appointment, He didn't want us to have that, but we can get that information from the office. The receptionist took messages, wrote down his name and phone number. They pulled the message slips from Heritage Realty, the name George Morrison, and a phone number. Cassidy dialed it. A hotel operator answered. Warwick Hotel, how may I direct your call? Room 214, please. One moment. A pause, then. I'm sorry, we don't have anyone registered in room 214. Can you check if you have a George Morrison registered anywhere in the hotel? Another pause. No, sir. No one by that name is currently registered. Cassidy hung up and looked at Martinez. Dead end. Fake name. Fake room number. So, who is George Morrison? That question led to the investigation's first major break. Running the name through databases, they found dozens of George Morrisons in Texas, but one in particular caught Cassidy's attention. George Morrison, age 47, who had died in a car accident in Dallas on March 12, 1974, 3.5 years before Diane's murder. He used a dead man's name, Cassidy said. That's sophisticated. It means if we traced the name, we'd find someone real, with a real background, but someone who couldn't contradict the story or provide information about who was impersonating him. How would he know about George Morrison's death? Martinez asked. Obituaries. Public records. If you're planning to use a false identity, you'd want something that would hold up to basic checking, but couldn't be verified directly. A dead person fits perfectly. They contacted Eleanor Morrison, the widow of the real George Morrison, who still lived in Dallas. She was horrified to learn that someone had used her late husband's name in connection with a murder. I don't understand, Eleanor said over the phone, her voice trembling. Who would do such a thing? Why would they use George's name? That's what we're trying to determine, Mrs. Morrison. Is there anyone you can think of who might have known your husband, who might have had access to information about him? George died over 3 years ago. I don't see how anyone could... his obituary was in the Dallas newspaper. Anyone could have read it, which was exactly the problem. The killer could have simply scanned obituaries looking for a suitable identity to steal. Male, appropriate age, died far enough in the past that details would be fuzzy, but recent enough that the name wouldn't seem outdated. The investigation expanded. Cassidy and Martinez interviewed everyone at Heritage Realty, all of Diane's recent clients, neighbors around the Shadywood property. They canvassed the memorial area, asking if anyone had seen suspicious vehicles or unfamiliar people on September 23rd. One neighbor, James Whitmore, who lived 2 houses down from the Shadywood property, provided a potentially useful detail. He'd been working in his garage that Friday afternoon and had noticed a car parked on the street around 2 o'clock, a dark-colored sedan, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet, mid-1970s model. He hadn't paid much attention to it at the time, just noted it wasn't a car he recognized from the neighborhood. Can you describe the driver? Cassidy asked. Didn't really see him, just noticed the car. Dark blue or black, I think. Nothing special about it. It was something, but barely. Houston had thousands of dark sedans matching that vague description. As word of Diane's murder spread through Houston's real estate community, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Other female real estate agents came forward with stories of suspicious calls and appointments that, in retrospect, seemed similar to what had happened to Diane. Susan Harper, an agent with Keller Williams, reported that 2 weeks before Diane's murder, she'd received multiple calls from someone who identified himself as Robert Stevens, claiming to be relocating to Houston and wanting to see properties in the Memorial and Tanglewood areas. She'd scheduled a showing, but the client never appeared. When she tried to call back the number he'd given, it was disconnected. Another agent, Patricia Caldwell, described a similar experience from July. Persistent calls from a Dr. William Hayes, who seemed very interested in seeing vacant properties, but always canceled at the last minute, or simply didn't show up. It's like he was testing us, Susan Harper told Cassidy during an interview. Seeing how we operate, what information we require, whether we'd meet him alone at empty houses. I thank God he didn't show up for our appointment. That could have been me, instead of Diane. The realization that there might have been other potential victims, that Diane might not have been the first target, changed the entire investigation. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, or a single act of violence. This was a predator who'd been hunting female real estate agents, possibly for months. Cassidy created a timeline of all the suspicious contacts other agents had reported. The pattern was chilling. July 10th. Dr. William Hayes contacts Patricia Caldwell, schedules showing, doesn't appear August 3rd, Michael Thompson contacts agent named Rachel Simmons, requests showing a vacant property in River Oaks. Doesn't appear August 27th. Robert Stevens contacts Susan Harper, schedules showing. Doesn't appear September 20th. George Morrison contacts Diane Morgan, schedules showing, appears and murders her. He was practicing, Martinez said, looking at the timeline, or screening potential victims. Something about Diane made her the one he chose to actually attack. Or she was simply the one who was vulnerable at the right time, Cassidy countered. Wrong place, wrong day, wrong property. They pulled descriptions from all the agents who'd had contact with the suspicious callers. The physical descriptions varied slightly. Some remembered someone taller, others shorter, different hair colors, but all agreed on general characteristics. White male, 30s to 40s, professional appearance, nothing distinctive or memorable. He's careful about that, Cassidy observed. Deliberately looks average, forgettable. And he's using different names, probably slightly different appearances each time. This is someone methodical and intelligent. The investigation into Diane's background revealed nothing that would explain why she'd been targeted specifically. She had no enemies, no stalkers, no angry ex-clients. Her life was stable, conventional. Devoted mother and wife, successful career, active in her church and children's school. She was, by all accounts, simply a good person who'd been in the wrong place when a killer decided to act. Robert Morgan was investigated and cleared quickly. His alibi was solid. He'd been in meetings at Shell Oil all afternoon on September 23rd, witnessed by dozens of co-workers. More importantly, his grief was clearly genuine. The man was devastated by his wife's death, struggling to function, to take care of his children, to process the incomprehensible fact that Diane was gone. We had 13 years together, Robert told Cassidy during an interview at the Morgan home, his voice hollow. Met in college, married young, built this life together. She was supposed to grow old with me, watch our kids grow up, become grandparents someday, and now I have to tell Sarah and Michael that their mother is never coming home. How do I do that, detective? How do I explain to a 6-year-old that some monster killed his mother? Cassidy had no answer for that. He'd worked too many homicides, seen too many families destroyed by violence. All he could offer was the promise that he would find who did this. The missing appointments book continued to bother Cassidy. It was the only thing taken from the scene. Not money, not jewelry, just Diane's planner. The killer had specifically wanted that book. Heritage Realty provided copies of appointment records they had on file, but Diane's personal book would have had more detail. Notes about clients, impressions, follow-up items. It might have contained information the killer didn't want discovered. On October 1st, 8 days after Diane's murder, Cassidy held a press conference. The media attention had been intense. Realtor murdered at showing was front-page news in the Houston Chronicle, and television stations were covering the story extensively. We're asking anyone with information about the murder of Diane Morgan to come forward, Cassidy said to the assembled reporters. We're particularly interested in hearing from anyone who may have been contacted by someone using the name George Morrison, or who may have had unusual interactions with potential real estate clients in recent months. This individual is dangerous and may contact other agents. We urge all real estate professionals to take precautions. Meet clients at your office first. Get verifiable identification. Don't show properties alone if possible. The press conference generated hundreds of tips, most of which led nowhere, but it also prompted more real estate agents to come forward with stories of suspicious contacts. The pattern Cassidy had identified grew more extensive and more troubling. This wasn't just someone who'd called a few agents. This was someone who'd been systematically contacting female real estate agents across Houston for months, possibly longer, gathering information about how the industry worked and looking for the right opportunity to strike. The question that haunted Cassidy was whether Diane was the first victim, or simply the first one they knew about. Chapter 2. The Hunter. As October progressed with no major breaks in the case, Detective Cassidy expanded his investigation beyond Houston. He contacted police departments in other major Texas cities, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, asking if they'd had similar cases, female real estate agents murdered at property showings. Dallas reported an unsolved case from January 1976. Carolyn Fletcher, age 29, found strangled in a vacant house she'd been scheduled to show. The case had gone cold with no suspects. Austin had a suspicious death from June 1975. Margaret Riley, age 32, found dead at a property showing. Officially ruled a heart attack, but with some inconsistencies that had never been fully explained. Cassidy requested full case files from both departments. When they arrived, he spread the materials across the conference table in the homicide division and studied them carefully, looking for connections. Carolyn Fletcher in Dallas, Margaret Riley in Austin, Diane Morgan in Houston. 3 dead real estate agents across 3 cities over a span of nearly 3 years. The Dallas case had striking similarities to Diane's murder. Carolyn had been found in the master bedroom of a vacant property, strangled, with no signs of struggle and no sexual assault. Her appointments book had been missing. The client she'd been scheduled to meet, someone named David Anderson, had never been identified, and the contact information had been false. The Austin case was less clear-cut. Margaret Riley had been found dead at a showing, but the medical examiner had attributed her death to cardiac arrest, possibly brought on by an undiagnosed heart condition. There'd been no obvious signs of foul play, but reading the details now, with the knowledge of the other cases, Cassidy saw suspicious elements. Margaret had been a healthy, active woman with no prior heart problems. She'd been scheduled to show the property to a client who'd called repeatedly, but whose identity couldn't be verified. And while no appointments book was mentioned as missing in the original report, there was a reference to her briefcase being found partially empty, with no explanation of what might have been taken. "Eugene, look at this," Cassidy said to Martinez, who was reviewing other case files at his desk. "I think we've got a serial killer. 3 victims across Texas, all real estate agents, all killed at property showings." Martinez came over to examine the materials. Different cities, spread over years. How would we prove they're connected? The method, the targeting of female agents, the use of false identities. And look, Cassidy pointed to the calendar. Margaret Riley died in June 75 in Austin. 14 months later, Carolyn Fletcher died in Dallas. 16 months after that, Diane Morgan died here. There's a pattern to the timing. They contacted the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, a relatively new division that specialized in profiling serial criminals. Agent William Bradford was assigned to consult on the case. Bradford reviewed all the materials and provided a preliminary profile of the killer. White male, likely between 35 and 45 years old. Intelligent, organized, methodical. Probably has some connection to real estate. Either works in the industry, has recently bought or sold property, or has studied it carefully. The use of dead persons' identities for his aliases suggests research skills and planning. The targeting of female agents specifically indicates both misogyny and calculation. He views women as easier targets, but also chooses victims in situations where he can create plausible reasons to be alone with them in isolated locations. The killer likely has a stable job and outward appearance of normalcy. He may be married or have been married. He's comfortable with violence but controls it carefully. No overkill, no unnecessary brutality, just efficient murder. This suggests either military or law enforcement training, or extensive practice. The cooling-off periods between crimes suggest he's not driven by uncontrollable compulsion, but rather kills when opportunity and desire align. He may be working his way through different cities to avoid detection, or he may travel for legitimate reasons. Work, family, and commits murders in different locations opportunistically. Most concerning, he's been successful multiple times, which means he's confident and likely escalating. The progression from one victim in 75 to one in 76 to one in 77 suggests he may be accelerating. There may be more victims we haven't connected to him yet. The profile was both helpful and disturbing. It gave them a framework for understanding who they were looking for, but it also confirmed that Diane's killer was an experienced predator who'd been operating successfully for years. Cassidy initiated a comprehensive review of suspicious deaths and disappearances of women in Texas and surrounding states dating back to 1970. If the killer had victims before Margaret Riley, they needed to identify them. The search uncovered several possibilities. Linda Granger, Oklahoma City, March 1974. Real estate agent found dead in her car. Initially ruled suicide, but family disputed the findings. Sharon Williamson, Tulsa, November 1973. Real estate agent disappeared after a property showing. Never found Betty Ann Hutchins, Little Rock, Arkansas, September 1972. Real estate agent found strangled in vacant property, case unsolved. Each case had elements that fit the pattern. Cassidy began the painstaking work of coordinating with multiple police departments across several states, comparing notes, looking for definitive connections. Meanwhile, in Houston, the real estate community was on edge. Security protocols were hastily implemented. Agencies began requiring agents to check in before and after showings, to only meet new clients at the office first, to work in pairs whenever possible. Some female agents quit the profession entirely, too frightened to continue. Others purchased weapons, took self-defense classes, and became hyper-vigilant about every client interaction. Heritage Realty, where Diane had worked, was hit particularly hard. Martin Kendrick, the agency owner, implemented strict new policies and hired security consultants to train his agents. But the damage was done. 3 agents left the firm, clients were nervous, and business declined sharply. "Diane's murder is destroying my business," Kendrick told Cassidy during an interview in early November. "Not that I'm complaining. Her family lost so much more than I have, but I need to know. Are my other agents safe? Is this killer going to target someone else from my agency?" "We don't believe the agency itself is significant," Cassidy replied. "The pattern suggests he targets individual female agents opportunistically, based on availability and circumstance rather than specific stalking. Your new security procedures should help protect your staff." But privately, Cassidy wasn't sure. The killer had successfully murdered at least 3 women, possibly more, over several years. He was smart, patient, and adaptable. Would new security protocols really stop him, or would he simply adjust his approach? In late November, Cassidy got a potential break. A woman named Joyce Brennan contacted Houston police to report that her ex-husband, Dale Brennan, was obsessed with real estate and had a history of violence against women. "I don't know if he's your guy," Joyce said, sitting in Cassidy's office looking nervous but determined. "But when I saw the news about that real estate agent being killed, something clicked. Dale used to drive around looking at houses for sale, collecting flyers, going to open houses. He'd spend hours doing it. And he had a temper, especially toward women. He hit me more than once before I left him." "Where is Dale now?" "He lives in Pasadena, works as a mechanic. We've been divorced for 2 years." Cassidy pulled Dale Brennan's records. He was 43, had a history of domestic violence arrests, and had been employed at various automotive shops around Houston for the past decade. Nothing immediately screamed serial killer, but the interest in real estate was notable. They brought Dale in for questioning. He was a big man, over 6 feet tall and heavily built, with grease under his fingernails and an aggressive demeanor. "I don't know anything about any dead real estate agent," Dale said when Cassidy questioned him. "My ex-wife is trying to cause me problems because I'm behind on alimony payments. Tell me about your interest in real estate, Mr. Brennan. I like looking at houses. So what?" "That's not a crime. Where were you on September 23rd between 1 and 4 in the afternoon?" Dale thought for a moment. "At work. I work at Martinez Auto Shop in Pasadena. You can check." They did check. Dale's alibi held up. He'd been at work all day. September 23rd, witnessed by his boss and multiple customers. Moreover, Dale didn't match the physical description witnesses had provided of the man calling agents. Dale was too big, too rough-looking, too memorable. The man they were looking for was average, forgettable. Dale Brennan was eliminated as a suspect, but the tip illustrated the challenge Cassidy faced. Lots of people had interest in real estate. Lots of men had histories of violence. Finding the specific individual who combined access, knowledge, skill, and murderous intent was like finding a needle in a haystack. December brought another troubling development. An agent in San Antonio named Rebecca Torres reported that she'd received several calls from someone identifying himself as Thomas Bradley, claiming to be relocating from California and wanting to see properties. The pattern was familiar. Multiple calls, pressure to schedule showings quickly, interest in vacant properties. Rebecca, who'd been following the news about Diane Morgan's murder, had been cautious. She'd insisted on meeting Thomas Bradley at her office first before showing any properties. The man had agreed, but never showed up for the appointment. "I think it was him," Rebecca told the San Antonio detective who took her report. "The Houston killer. I think he contacted me and I got lucky that he moved on when I didn't agree to meet him alone at an empty house." The San Antonio police contacted Cassidy. Rebecca's description of Thomas Bradley matched the general profile. Average height, professional appearance, nothing distinctive. The phone number he'd given was, predictably, false. "He's active again," Martinez said when Cassidy shared this development. 2 months after Diane, he's back to testing potential victims. Or he never stopped, Cassidy replied grimly. We only know about the contacts that get reported. How many other agents has he called who didn't think anything of it when he didn't show up? They issued another public warning, this time coordinated across Texas law enforcement. Real estate agents were advised to never meet unknown clients alone, to verify all contact information before showings, to trust their instincts if something felt wrong. The Christmas season was bittersweet for the Morgan family. Robert struggled to maintain normalcy for Sarah and Michael, putting up a tree, buying presents, going through the motions. But Diane's absence was a gaping wound. The children kept asking when Mommy was coming home, struggling to understand that she never would. On Christmas Eve, Robert visited Cassidy at the police station, bringing a photo of Diane taken the previous Christmas. Smiling, vibrant, alive. Please don't give up on finding him, Robert said, his eyes haunted. I know it's been 3 months with no arrests. I know the case is getting cold. But whoever did this to Diane is still out there. He might hurt someone else's wife, someone else's mother. You can't let him get away with it. I won't, Cassidy promised. This case stays active as long as I'm a cop. I will find him. It was a promise Cassidy intended to keep. But as 1977 turned to 1978 with no significant progress, he wondered if finding Diane's killer might require more luck than skill, and whether that luck would arrive in time to prevent another murder. Chapter 3. The Pattern Breaks. The first months of 1978 brought a frustrating lull in the investigation. Despite extensive work coordinating with other jurisdictions, despite the FBI profile, despite hundreds of tips, Detective Cassidy was no closer to identifying Diane Morgan's killer. Then, on March 14th, the pattern broke in an unexpected way. A real estate agent named Megan Sullivan was showing a property in the Heights neighborhood of Houston when her client, who'd identified himself over the phone as Kenneth Martin, attacked her in the kitchen. Unlike previous victims, Megan fought back fiercely, screaming and scratching her attacker. A neighbor working in his yard heard the commotion and came running, frightening the attacker away before he could complete the murder. Megan was rushed to the hospital with bruises and shock but alive. For the first time, investigators had a surviving victim who could provide detailed information about the killer. Cassidy arrived at Memorial Hermann Hospital within an hour of getting the call. Megan was 31, a marathon runner in excellent physical shape, which likely saved her life. She sat propped up in the hospital bed, her neck bruised where hands had attempted to strangle her, but her eyes were fierce and determined. I want to help you catch him, Megan said before Cassidy even asked his first question. I know what he looks like. I fought him. I scratched his face and arms. He'll have marks. Tell me everything you remember. Starting from first contact. Megan explained that Kenneth Martin had called her office 4 days earlier, saying he was relocating to Houston from Phoenix for a job with an oil services company. He wanted to see properties in the Heights and Montrose areas, preferably older homes with character. He'd sounded professional, knowledgeable, exactly like dozens of legitimate clients Megan had worked with over her 5 years in real estate. They'd scheduled the showing for 2 o'clock on March 14th. Megan had arrived a few minutes early to open up the house, a 1920s bungalow that had been vacant for 2 months. Kenneth Martin arrived right on time. Describe him, Cassidy said. White male, late 30s to early 40s, about 5'10", average build, brown hair, brown eyes, glasses with wire frames. He wore dark slacks, a tan jacket, white shirt, very ordinary looking. I honestly wouldn't have been able to pick him out of a crowd if I'd passed him on the street. Any accent? Distinctive speech patterns? No accent. Educated sounding. He used real estate terminology correctly. Asked intelligent questions about the property. Everything seemed normal. When did things change? Megan's expression hardened. We'd gone through most of the house. I was showing him the kitchen, talking about the vintage tile work. I turned my back for just a second to point out the original cabinets, and suddenly his arm was around my throat. He was trying to strangle me. What did you do? I panicked at first. Couldn't breathe. But then my training kicked in. I take self-defense classes. I stomped down hard on his instep, drove my elbow back into his ribs, and when he loosened his grip slightly, I screamed as loud as I could. He tried to tighten his hold again, but I kept fighting, scratching at his face and arms. I felt my nails break his skin, felt blood under my fingernails. That's when the neighbor came? Yes. Mr. Torres from next door came running, shouting that he was calling the police. The attacker shoved me hard into the counter and ran. By the time Mr. Torres got into the house, the man was already out the front door and gone. Did you see what he was driving? No. I was too shaken, and he'd left so quickly. Cassidy had crime scene techs collect samples from under Megan's fingernails. If she'd scratched the attacker deeply enough to draw blood, they might have forensic evidence linking him to the crime. In 1978, DNA analysis wasn't yet available for criminal cases, but they could at minimum determine blood type. The neighbor, Mr. Torres, had unfortunately not gotten a good look at the fleeing attacker, just a glimpse of a man in light-colored clothing, running to a car parked down the street. He couldn't describe the vehicle beyond saying it was dark-colored. Megan worked with a police sketch artist to create a composite drawing of Kenneth Martin. The result was frustratingly generic, an average-looking man with no distinctive features, but it was more than they'd had before. The sketch was circulated to all Houston-area real estate offices and published in newspapers with a warning. This man was suspected in multiple attacks on real estate agents and should be considered extremely dangerous. Tips flooded in. Dozens of people claimed to recognize the man in the sketch. All had to be investigated. All led nowhere. But Megan's attack did confirm several crucial things. First, Diane's killer was still active and still operating in Houston. Second, he was continuing to use the same method: false identity, appointment at vacant property, attack from behind. Third, he could be stopped if victims fought back quickly enough. Real estate agencies across Houston mandated new safety protocols. No solo showings of vacant properties. All new clients had to provide verifiable identification before any appointments. Some agencies installed panic buttons that agents could wear during showings. The heightened security made it harder for the killer to operate, but it also pushed him to adapt. In May 1978, an agent in Fort Worth named Lisa Chandler reported a suspicious encounter. A man calling himself Richard Wilson had contacted her about seeing properties, but when she insisted on meeting him at her office first and asked for identification, he became evasive and eventually hung up. Lisa recognized the pattern from warnings she'd received about the Houston attacks. In June, a similar report came from Corpus Christi. In July, from Beaumont. The killer was testing defenses across Texas, looking for agents who weren't following the new security protocols, searching for an opportunity. But as the summer progressed with no new successful attacks, Cassidy began to wonder if the killer had been scared off permanently by Megan Sullivan's resistance and the increased security measures. Then, in early August, everything changed. A man named Gregory Hollis walked into the Houston Police Headquarters and asked to speak with the detective investigating the real estate agent murders. He was 41 years old, neatly dressed in business casual attire, with thinning brown hair and glasses. He looked like an accountant or middle manager, utterly unremarkable. "I need to talk to someone about the Diane Morgan case," Gregory told the desk sergeant. "I have information." Cassidy was called down from the homicide division. He brought Gregory to an interview room, noting the man's calm demeanor and steady hands. Gregory didn't seem nervous or agitated. He seemed almost relieved. "What information do you have about Diane Morgan's murder?" Cassidy asked. Gregory was quiet for a long moment, his hands folded on the table. Then he looked directly at Cassidy and said, "I killed her. I killed all of them." Cassidy felt his heart rate spike, but he kept his expression neutral. False confessions were common in high-profile cases. He needed to determine if this was genuine. "All of whom?" Cassidy asked carefully. "Diane Morgan here in Houston, Carolyn Fletcher in Dallas, Margaret Riley in Austin, and 3 others before that. Sharon in Tulsa, Linda in Oklahoma City, Betty Ann in Little Rock." Gregory recited the names and locations with eerie precision. Those were the cases Cassidy had identified as potentially connected. But that information hadn't all been made public. Someone confessing and knowing those specific details was significant. "Why are you telling me this now?" Cassidy asked. "Because I can't keep doing it," Gregory said simply. "Because that woman in March, Megan Sullivan, she fought back and got away, and it made me realize that eventually I'd make a mistake. Someone would get a better look at me. Someone would remember something useful, and you'd catch me. I'd rather turn myself in on my terms than be arrested. Tell me about Diane Morgan. Prove to me you killed her." Gregory described the murder in clinical detail. The phone calls to Heritage Realty, the fake identity as George Morrison, the appointment at the Shadywood property. He described exactly where Diane had been standing when he attacked her, exactly how he'd positioned her body afterward, exactly what he'd taken from the scene. "I kept her appointments book," Gregory said. "I kept something from each of them. Trophies, I suppose you'd call them. They're at my house. I'll tell you where to find them." Cassidy had him escorted to a holding cell, while detectives obtained a search warrant for Gregory Hollis's address, a modest apartment in the Montrose neighborhood. The search uncovered a locked box in the bedroom closet containing a horrifying collection: 7 appointments, books, and planners belonging to 7 different women. Diane Morgan's leather-bound planner was among them. Also in the box were newspaper clippings about each murder, meticulously organized in chronological order. Gregory had been documenting his own crimes like a researcher compiling data. As news of the arrest spread, the reaction was seismic. Robert Morgan received a call from Cassidy that evening. "We've arrested someone for Diane's murder," Cassidy said. "He's confessed, and we have physical evidence linking him to the crime. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news." Robert's response was a strangled sound, somewhere between a sob and a shout. Who did this to her?" "His name is Gregory Hollis. Does that name mean anything to you?" "No. I've never heard of him. Why? Why did he kill Diane?" That was the question investigators were trying to answer. In interviews over the following days, Gregory provided extensive details about each murder, but struggled to articulate a clear motive. "I didn't hate them specifically," Gregory said during one interview. "They weren't personal to me. They were opportunities, situations where I could exercise control, where I could do something most people can't do." Psychological evaluation revealed that Gregory Hollis was a textbook psychopath. No empathy, no remorse, grandiose sense of his own superiority. He'd been married briefly in his 20s, but his wife had left him after a year, later describing him as cold and emotionless. He worked as an insurance adjuster, a job that required attention to detail and methodical work, but limited human interaction. The FBI profile had been remarkably accurate. Gregory was intelligent, organized, employed in a stable job, and had carefully planned his crimes. He'd started killing in 1972 after his divorce, initially in Arkansas where he was living at the time. When he moved to Oklahoma for work, he killed there. Then Texas, first Austin, then Dallas, then Houston. "I chose real estate agents because they were accessible," Gregory explained matter-of-factly. "They advertised their availability. They're expected to meet strangers alone at empty properties. The industry structure made it easy to create opportunities." "Why did you use dead people's names for your fake identities?" "I read about it in a crime novel. Seemed like a smart way to create an identity that would seem legitimate if checked superficially, but couldn't be traced back to anyone real who might remember me." The cold calculation was chilling. Gregory had approached murder like a project, solving logistical problems and eliminating risks. "Why did you take their appointments books?" For the first time, Gregory showed something that might have been emotion, a slight smile. "I wanted something personal from each of them, something they'd touched and written in." The books were full of their handwriting, their plans, their lives. Taking those felt like taking a piece of them. The trial began in February 1979. Gregory Hollis faced 7 counts of first-degree murder across multiple jurisdictions. Texas had jurisdiction for 4 of the murders: Margaret Riley, Carolyn Fletcher, Diane Morgan, and Betty Ann Hutchins, whose Little Rock case was transferred. Oklahoma and Arkansas would pursue separate trials for the other victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Gregory's confession, the trophies found in his apartment, forensic evidence linking him to the crime scenes, witness testimony from Megan Sullivan identifying him as her attacker. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity due to mental illness, but Gregory himself undermined that strategy by appearing perfectly rational and coherent throughout the proceedings. On March 22, 1979, exactly 18 months after Diane Morgan's murder, Gregory Hollis was convicted on all counts. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. During the sentencing phase, the families of the victims were allowed to provide impact statements. Robert Morgan took the stand, his voice shaking but determined. "Diane was more than a victim in your sick game," Robert said, looking directly at Gregory. "She was a person, a wife, a mother, a daughter, a friend. She had dreams and plans and a future that you stole from her. My children lost their mother. I lost my partner. The world lost a good person who helped people find homes and made them happy. You took all of that away for no reason other than your own twisted satisfaction. I hope you spend the rest of your life in prison thinking about what you've done. I hope you never know another day of freedom." Gregory showed no reaction to the statement. His face remained blank, emotionless. The judge sentenced Gregory Hollis to 7 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security facility, never to be released. As Gregory was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, reporters shouted questions at him. He ignored them all except for one question from a crime writer who called out, "Do you regret what you did?" Gregory paused, turned slightly, and said clearly enough for the courtroom to hear, "I regret getting caught." The statement sent a chill through everyone present. No remorse, no humanity, just cold calculation about his own failures. In the years following Gregory Hollis's conviction, the impact of his crimes rippled through the real estate industry and beyond. The case became a catalyst for fundamental changes in how real estate agents approached safety. The National Association of Realtors developed comprehensive safety protocols that became industry standard across the United States. These included requirements for agents to meet new clients at the office and verify identification before any property showings, use buddy systems for vacant property showings whenever possible, install and carry personal safety devices such as alarms and panic buttons, conduct background checks on clients requesting showings of high-value or isolated properties, maintain regular check-in protocols during showings, with office staff monitoring agents' locations. Many agencies implemented technology solutions, early mobile, communication devices that allowed agents to signal for help, later evolving into GPS tracking systems and smartphone safety apps. Diane's death changed our entire industry, Martin Kendrick of Heritage Realty told a reporter in 1982, 3 years after Gregory's conviction. We had been complacent, assuming that our professionalism would protect us. We learned the hard way that predators don't care about professionalism. They care about opportunity. Now we eliminate those opportunities. For the families of Gregory's victims, the conviction brought a measure of closure, but not peace. Robert Morgan struggled for years with depression and survivor's guilt. He eventually remarried in 1985 to a woman named Patricia who'd also lost a spouse, and together they blended their families and built a new life. But Robert never forgot Diane, and he made sure his children remembered their mother not as a murder victim, but as the loving, vibrant woman she'd been. Sarah and Michael Morgan grew up carrying the weight of their mother's murder. Sarah became a victim's advocate, working with families who'd lost loved ones to violent crime. Michael became a police detective, following in the footsteps of Frank Cassidy, whom he'd met as a child and admired for his dedication to finding his mother's killer. "My mother's death shaped who I became," Michael told an interviewer in 2007, nearly 30 years after Diane's murder. "I could have let it destroy me, make me bitter and afraid. Instead, I chose to honor her memory by helping others, by making sure that the kind of evil that took her away faces justice. That's her legacy. Not what Gregory Hollis did to her, but how her family and her community responded by becoming stronger and more vigilant." Detective Frank. Cassidy remained with the Houston Police Department until his retirement in 1992. The Diane Morgan case was the defining investigation of his career, and he kept a photograph of her on his desk until the day he retired, a reminder of the importance of persistence and the human cost of violent crime. In his retirement speech, Cassidy reflected on the case. "There were times when I thought we'd never find Diane's killer. The trail was cold, the leads dried up, and it seemed like he'd gotten away with it. But police work isn't just about being smart or lucky. It's about refusing to give up. It's about keeping the files active, following every lead no matter how thin, and being ready when the break comes." Gregory Hollis turned himself in. Yes, but we were ready for him because we'd never stopped working the case. That's what we owe every victim. Megan Sullivan. The agent who survived Gregory's attack, and whose resistance likely saved other lives by prompting his eventual surrender, struggled with trauma for years after the incident. She left real estate and became a self-defense instructor, teaching women how to protect themselves in dangerous situations. "I was lucky," Megan said during a safety seminar in 1983. "I had training, I was physically fit, and a neighbor happened to be close enough to hear me scream." Most of Gregory's victims didn't have those advantages. That's why training matters. That's why awareness matters. That's why we can never be complacent about our safety. Megan's story became a case study in self-defense courses across the country. Her quick thinking and physical resistance demonstrated that fighting back could make the difference between life and death. The other families, the Fletchers in Dallas, the Rileys in Austin, the families of the earlier victims in Oklahoma and Arkansas, all found varying degrees of peace with Gregory's conviction. Some attended parole hearings every time he became theoretically eligible, determined to keep him imprisoned. Others chose to move forward without engaging with the legal process, finding closure in other ways. Eleanor Morrison, the widow whose husband's identity Gregory had stolen to create the false persona used to lure Diane, was horrified by how her late husband's name had been used. She became an advocate for identity theft protections, working with legislators to create laws making it more difficult to assume the identities of deceased persons for criminal purposes. George's name should have died with him in peace, Eleanor said, during testimony before a Texas legislative committee in 1980. Instead, it was used to facilitate murder. We need better protections for the identities of the deceased, better verification systems, and stronger penalties for identity theft. The legislation that resulted, though it couldn't undo the harm, did make it harder for future criminals to use similar tactics. Gregory Hollis himself became a subject of fascination for criminal psychologists and true crime researchers. His willingness to provide detailed accounts of his crimes, combined with his complete lack of remorse, made him a valuable, if disturbing, case study in psychopathy. Dr. Robert Hare, the psychologist who developed the psychopathy checklist, interviewed Gregory in prison in 1981 as part of research into serial killers. Hare's assessment scored Gregory as one of the most extreme cases of psychopathy he'd encountered. Gregory Hollis views other people as objects, not as human beings with inherent worth, Dr. Hare wrote in his analysis. He experiences no emotional connection to his victims. Their suffering is meaningless to him. He killed not out of rage or passion, but out of what he perceived as logical opportunity. In his mind, he was simply taking advantage of situations that presented themselves. The fact that this required ending human lives didn't register as morally significant to him. The question that haunted investigators and psychologists alike was whether there had been warning signs earlier in Gregory's life. Deep background investigation revealed a childhood marked by emotional coldness and minor cruelty, torturing insects, being indifferent to family pets' deaths, never forming close friendships, but nothing that screamed future serial killer in a way that would have prompted intervention. The truth is, we don't have good methods for identifying people like Gregory Hollis before they act, admitted Dr. Patricia Reynolds, a forensic psychologist who studied the case. Not everyone with psychopathic traits becomes a violent criminal. Many lead productive, law-abiding lives. They're just emotionally shallow and self-centered. Gregory made the choice to use his lack of empathy as permission to kill. That choice is what made him a monster. As the 1980s progressed, the real estate murders case faded from front-page news, but remained part of the industry's collective memory. New agents entering the profession were taught about Diane Morgan and the other victims as part of their safety training. The phrase, "Remember Diane Morgan," became shorthand in real estate circles for maintaining vigilance about personal safety. The Shadywood property where Diane was murdered sold eventually, though it took several years. The new owners were never told about the murder. Texas law didn't require disclosure of deaths that occurred in a property if they weren't the result of the property's condition. The house changed hands several more times over the decades, with most occupants never knowing its dark history. Heritage Realty, the agency where Diane had worked, continued operating until the late 1990s, when Martin Kendrick retired and sold the business. The new owners renamed it and moved locations, but Kendrick made sure that before the old office closed, a small memorial plaque was installed honoring Diane and acknowledging her impact on industry safety standards. Diane Morgan didn't choose to be a martyr for real estate safety, Kendrick said during the plaque dedication in 1998. She was simply a professional doing her job when evil found her. But her death forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about the vulnerabilities in our industry, and to make changes that have undoubtedly saved lives. That's not why she should be remembered. She should be remembered as a good person, a loving mother, a dedicated professional, but it is part of her legacy, and we honor it. Gregory Hollis remained in prison, initially at the Huntsville unit in Texas, later transferred to other facilities as the prison system's needs changed. He was a model prisoner, quiet, compliant, causing no trouble. Guards who worked his cell block described him as polite and detached, showing no interest in other inmates or in causing problems. He gave occasional interviews to researchers and journalists, always with the same clinical detachment. When asked if he thought about his victims, he replied, "I remember them as one might remember items on a list. I recall the logistics of each situation, the planning involved, the execution of the plan, but emotional memories? No." I don't think about them that way. Several of the victims' families protested these interviews, arguing that Gregory was being given a platform to relive his crimes. But legal experts pointed out that as a convicted criminal, he had limited rights to control his own story, and the information he provided had value for understanding criminal psychology. In 1998, 20 years after his conviction, a television documentary titled The Real Estate Killer examined Gregory's crimes in detail. The program included interviews with Robert Morgan, Megan Sullivan, Detective Cassidy, and several criminal psychologists. Gregory himself was interviewed from prison, appearing on camera looking older, his hair white, his face lined, but still with that same unsettling emotional flatness. "Do you understand why what you did was wrong?" the interviewer asked. "I understand that society considers it wrong," Gregory replied carefully. "I understand that there are laws against it and moral frameworks that condemn it. But do I feel, in my core, that it was wrong? No, I can't access that emotional understanding. I intellectually know I shouldn't have done it because of the consequences. But the moral wrongness that you feel, I don't have that capacity." It was a chilling admission of his fundamental disconnection from human empathy. The documentary sparked renewed interest in the case, leading to several true crime books about Gregory's murders. Authors examined the case from various angles: the investigative process, the psychological profile, the impact on the real estate industry, the family's stories. Robert Morgan cooperated with one such book, Empty Houses, Stolen Lives, published in 2001. His motivation was to ensure Diane was portrayed as more than just a victim in a serial killer's catalog. The books about Gregory Hollis tend to focus on him, his methods, his psychology, his crimes, Robert explained in the book's introduction. But this isn't his story. This is Diane's story, and Carolyn's, and Margaret's, and all the others. They were real people with real lives that mattered. I wanted the world to know Diane as I knew her, not just as real estate agent number 3 on some killer's list. The book included photographs of Diane with her children, excerpts from letters she'd written, testimonials from friends and colleagues about her kindness and professionalism. It humanized her in a way that news coverage of her murder never had. As the 20th anniversary of Diane's murder approached in 1997, a memorial service was held at the Houston church where her funeral had been conducted. The service was attended by over 200 people: family members, former colleagues, members of the real estate community, law enforcement officers who'd worked the case, and even some people who'd never met Diane but felt connected to her story. Linda Peterson, Diane's former colleague and best friend, spoke at the service. 20 years ago, I found my friend dead in a house she was showing. That moment changed my life forever. I left real estate. I struggled with guilt for years, wondering if I could have done something to prevent what happened. But over time, I've come to understand that Diane's death, while tragic and senseless, led to changes that have protected countless other agents. The safety protocols we now take for granted exist because of what happened to her. That doesn't make her loss acceptable, but it gives it meaning. Diane would have wanted her death to mean something, to help others, and it has. The service concluded with the planting of a tree in Diane's memory in a small park near Heritage Realty's former location. A plaque at the base of the tree read, "In memory of Diane Morgan, 1943-1977, and all real estate professionals who have lost their lives in service to their clients. May their memories inspire continued vigilance and safety." Michael Morgan, Diane's son, now a detective with the Houston Police Department, stood beside the tree with his sister Sarah after the ceremony. "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" Sarah asked. "I think she'd be amazed," Michael replied. "We were so young when she died. We could have been destroyed by it. Instead, we became people who help others, who fight for justice, who try to make the world safer. Yeah, I think Mom would be proud." The anniversary also prompted reflection within the criminal justice system about how serial predators operated and how they could be stopped earlier. Gregory Hollis had killed 7 women over a span of 5 years before being caught. With modern investigative techniques, data sharing between jurisdictions, and behavioral analysis methods that didn't exist in the 1970s, would he have been caught sooner? Retired FBI profiler William Bradford, who'd worked on the case, believed so. Today, we have databases that track similar crimes across jurisdictions. When the second real estate agent was murdered in a different city with a similar MO, red flags would go up immediately. We'd see the pattern faster, share information better, Coordinate investigations more efficiently. Gregory Hollis exploited the gaps in communication between police departments. Those gaps are smaller now, though not eliminated entirely. The 21st century brought new challenges to real estate safety. The rise of the internet created new vulnerabilities. Agents advertised their availability online, made their photos and contact information publicly accessible, sometimes met clients found through unverified online platforms. But it also created new tools: GPS tracking, instant communication, digital check-in systems, online verification services. The lessons learned from Diane Morgan's case remained relevant. Trust, but verify. Never assume someone is safe just because they seem professional. Prioritize safety over commissions. Work in teams when possible. Listen to instincts when something feels wrong. Gregory Hollis's story also became a case study in criminal psychology courses at universities across the country. Students studying forensic psychology, criminology, and law enforcement learned about his methods, his motivations, and the investigative techniques that eventually brought him to justice. Professor Amanda Chen, who taught criminal psychology at the University of Houston, used the case regularly in her coursework. Gregory Hollis exemplifies the organized, intelligent serial killer who plans meticulously and learns from experience. He didn't start with murder. He practiced, tested systems, identified vulnerabilities. That's what makes predators like him so dangerous. They're not impulsive or disorganized. They're patient hunters. Understanding how they think and operate is crucial for developing prevention and intervention strategies. In 2008, 30 years after his conviction, Gregory Hollis died in prison at the age of 71. The cause was pancreatic cancer. He'd refused treatment, apparently indifferent to his own death, as he'd been to the deaths of his victims. News of his death was met with mixed reactions from the victims' families. Some felt relief that he was finally gone. Others felt cheated that he'd died naturally, rather than facing the death penalty that some had advocated for during his trial. Robert Morgan, now 75 years old and in declining health himself, issued a statement through his son. Gregory Hollis's death doesn't change anything for our family. Diane has been gone for 31 years. We've lived most of our lives without her. He took that from us, and no amount of justice or vengeance can give it back. I'm glad he can't hurt anyone else, but his death doesn't give me satisfaction. Only memories of Diane give me that. Sarah Morgan, who'd become a successful victims advocate, had a different perspective. I'm glad he's dead. That probably makes me a bad person, but I don't care. He was a cancer on society, and now he's gone. The world is better without him in it. Both responses were understandable. There was no right way to process the death of someone who'd caused such profound harm. With Gregory's death, the last chapter of the case officially closed. The files were archived. The physical evidence was eventually destroyed after the required retention period. The appeals that Gregory had half-heartedly filed over the years became moot, but the impact of the case continued. In 2012, the National Association of Realtors established the Diane Morgan Safety Award, given annually to real estate professionals or organizations that demonstrated exceptional commitment to agent safety. The award included a monetary prize that could be used to implement safety technologies or training programs. "We never want the industry to forget the lessons we learned in the 1970s, said the NAR president during the first award ceremony. Diane Morgan and the other victims of Gregory Hollis paid the ultimate price for vulnerabilities in our industry practices. Their deaths led to changes that have saved countless lives. This award ensures that their memory and the importance of safety remain at the forefront of our profession." The first recipient of the award was a technology company that had developed a real estate safety app, allowing agents to share their locations in real time, send instant distress signals, and verify client identities through background check integrations. The app became widely adopted across the industry, adding another layer of protection for agents. Linda Peterson, Diane's former colleague who'd discovered her body, was invited to present one of the early awards. By then, in her late 60s, and long retired from real estate, Linda remained passionate about agent safety. "I found my best friend murdered in an empty house in 1977, Linda said to the assembled real estate professionals. "It was the worst day of my life, but I've spent the decades since then watching this industry transform itself, watching safety become a priority rather than an afterthought, watching technology and training combine to protect agents." Diane's death wasn't in vain. Neither were the deaths of the other victims. They sparked a revolution in how we approach our profession. Every agent who goes home safe at the end of the day, who doesn't become a victim because of the safety measures now in place, honors the memory of those we lost. By 2024, nearly 50 years after Diane Morgan's murder, her case had become historical, something that happened in a different era, to people who'd long since passed. But within the real estate industry, her name remained known. New agents learned about her in training. Safety protocols existed because of what happened to her. Michael Morgan, now retired from the Houston Police Department, occasionally gave talks at real estate safety seminars. At 72 years old, he bore a striking resemblance to his father Robert, who'd passed away in 2015. "I don't remember my mother's voice," Michael would tell audiences. "I was only 6 when she died. What I know about her comes from stories, from photographs, from the love my father kept alive for her throughout his life, but I feel like I know her through her impact. Every time a real estate agent follows safety protocols and goes home safe to their family, that's my mother's legacy. Every time someone questions a situation that feels wrong and protects themselves, that's her influence continuing. She didn't choose to be a symbol for safety. She just wanted to do her job and come home to her kids. But since that was taken from her, I'm glad that her death at least meant something." The house at 4218 Shadywood Lane, where Diane drew her last breath, still stands as of 2024. It's been renovated multiple times, the burnt orange carpet and wood paneling long since removed. The current owners, a young family with 2 children, have no idea of the property's history. They've made it a home filled with laughter and life, unknowingly bringing light to a place that once held such darkness. The memorial neighborhood where the house sits has changed dramatically since 1977. Property values have soared. The modest ranch homes have been torn down or extensively remodeled. Trees have grown taller. New generations have moved in, unaware of the crimes that once touched their community. But in the archives of the Houston Police Department, in the records of the Harris County Courts, in the files of the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, the case of Diane Morgan and the other victims of Gregory Hollis remains preserved. Future investigators studying serial predators, future agents learning about safety, future families touched by violent crime, all can access the story and learn from it. That's what remains when a real estate agent is murdered at an open house, when appointments books are stolen and fake names are used, when a predator hunts in plain sight, exploiting trust and opportunity. What remains is the determination to remember, to learn, to adapt, to protect. Diane Morgan never wanted to be famous. She wanted to sell houses, raise her children, grow old with her husband. She wanted an ordinary, happy life. Gregory Hollis stole that from her on September 23, 1977, but he couldn't steal her impact. He couldn't erase the changes her death inspired. He couldn't prevent the lives saved by the safety measures implemented because of what happened to her. In the end, that's the real story. Not the horror of the crime, but the resilience of those left behind. The father who raised 2 children alone and taught them to honor their mother's memory. The colleague who found her body and channeled trauma into advocacy. The detective who never gave up until justice was served. The industry that transformed itself to protect its members. Diane Morgan, 34 years old, real estate agent, wife, mother, victim of a serial killer. Remembered not just for how she died, but for what her death changed. That's the legacy that endures.